Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next installment of our Declaration of Independence Signer series. And today, we're taking a look at, this guy behind me, George Walton. Yeah, George Walton, the last of the signers from the state of Georgia. Yeah, the third and final one. We're going to be done with the state of Georgia and moving on. But first, we got to talk about George Walton. Now, if Henry was here, he would let you know, before we get into this, you got to hit subscribe down below for me, give us a like and a thumbs up, leave all those comments and questions, we love those, and of course, hit that little notification bell so you can be notified when we do release a new video. And if Henry was here, he'd tell you that is every single week. So here we go, George Walton, the last of the Georgia signers of the Declaration of Independence. And this is Dead History. Hey guys, TJ back with you. Yep, behind me, George Walton, the man who was the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, he was actually the youngest one. We're going to get into that and tell you all about it. And the interesting fact is, historians and researchers are not exactly sure when the exact year of his birth even was. But we do know for a fact he was the youngest signer. Born in Virginia, parents died at a very young age, and then he was in an apprenticeship, and all these different things we're going to tell you about before moving down to the state of Georgia. And then he became very involved in the politics of the time down in Georgia. Really cool story. A man who basically went from rags to riches. A self-made, self-taught man. Got a lot of really cool things to tell you about George Walton. So let's see, you guys did the likes, did the subscribes, comments, questions. You guys did it all. Now, if Henry was here, he'd tell you, you got to go grab those snacks. Go grab the turkey. Go grab the stuffing, the cranberry sauce, all of it. It's Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you out there, to you and yours, from Henry and myself. So here we go. We're going to sit. We're going to relax. We're going to watch our very last Georgia signer of our Declaration of Independence signer series, George Walton. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey guys, welcome. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next installment of our Declaration of Independence signer series, and we're taking a look today at George Walton. That's right, George Walton, the last of the Georgia signers. So the last signer from the state of Georgia, and actually the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. And we know that for a fact, that he was 100% the youngest signer of the Declaration itself. So pretty cool stuff to get into about George Walton. First, I wanted to just say a very, very happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. You're going to be watching these videos probably on the day before Thanksgiving, and then the second part will be released on Thanksgiving Day. So hopefully you are sitting down to your turkey and your family and friends and the Thanksgiving Day parade and football and all those good things. And hopefully you find some time to get these videos in. That would be wonderful. So if you are, thank you for making us a part of your holiday. And I hope everyone out there has a very happy, safe, and healthy Thanksgiving. We all have a lot to be thankful for, I'm sure. And definitely one of my favorite holidays. So with all that being said, let's just get right into it. George Walton, he's the last from Georgia. So let's get right into it. Jump right in. Who knows how long this part one will be? Maybe about 30 minutes or so. but we shall see. So here we go. George Walton, let's go. George Walton was born in Cumberland County, Virginia. The exact year of George Walton's birth is unknown. It is believed that he was born in 1749. Research has placed it as early as 1740, but others as late as 1749 and 1750. A biographer of all the signers, she uses, I believe it's a female author, she uses the date of 1741. Now, George Walton's parents died when he was an infant, which resulted in his adoption by an uncle with whom he entered apprenticeship as a carpenter. George Walton was a studious young man, but his uncle actively discouraged all study and believed a studious boy to be an idle one. George Walton continued studying, and once his apprenticeship had ended, he moved to Savannah, Georgia in 1769 to study law under a Mr. Young, and was admitted to the bar in 1774. George's brother, John Walton, anybody that knows that name, he's a historic figure as well. By the eve of the American Revolution, George Walton had become one of the most successful lawyers in all of Georgia. Pretty interesting stuff. And just to give a little bit of a background about his brother, John Walton was a founding father as well. He was actually a Georgia delegate to the Continental Congress. So, pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, John Walton, his brother, he actually signed the Articles of Confederation on behalf of the state of Georgia. So, pretty cool. John Walton, brother, signed the Articles of Confederation. George Walton, signer of the Declaration of Independence. So, pretty steeped in history, the Waltons were. Moving on to a different source, George Walton, lawyer, patriot, governor of Georgia. He was largely self-taught. As we said, he was orphaned at an early age. He was apprenticed to a carpenter who recognized Walton's intelligence, ambition, and character and released him from apprenticeship. He gave him part of his wages so that he might attend a local school. In 1769, he went to Savannah and he read law with Henry Young while working as a surveyor assistant to Matthew Talbot. Walton was admitted to the bar in 1774 at the age of 33. He also became a master mason in 1774, a member of Solomon's Lodge F&AM, Savannah. 2 Masonic lodges have been named in his honor. Just to let you know, it's Walton number 200 in Jasper County and George Walton Lodge number 699 in Augusta, Georgia. He was one of the founders and a trustee of Richmond Academy and a member of the committee to locate Franklin College, which is now the University of Georgia at Albany. In Savannah, Walton attended the first meetings called by the Patriots and condemned British colonial policies. So we're going to get into all of that, of course, more in depth, but not, of course, in this part 1. Though many of the signers held positions in their state militia, the number who actually saw battle, let alone were wounded or captured, is considerably smaller. But George Walton, a poor orphan child and self-made success story, survived a gunshot wound and imprisonment at the hands of the British. And we're going to get into all of that, like I said, further and further, really into part 2. Born in Virginia, orphaned very young. George Walton was poor, taken in by his uncle. There are 2 competing stories of the carpenter's treatment of George Walton when he was young, his uncle. One paints him as a mean man who was so opposed to Walton's desire to educate himself that he refused to give the boy proper candle so he could read his books. In this version of the story, the young Walton gathered wood chips so he could set them ablaze and by the meager glow, read whatever books he could get his little calloused hands on. The opposing story portrays the carpenter as a kindly old man who actually let Walton take time off of work to attend school. It's hard to determine which account of Walton's apprenticeship is true, but there is no doubt that Walton was poor and uneducated and had a rough time of it, especially when compared to the more pampered and wealthy signers. Yet still he managed, despite little formal schooling, to educate himself well enough that he was able to study with a lawyer when he moved to Savannah in his 20s. Walton was largely responsible for shaping Savannah into Georgia's other Whig outpost, the first being signer Lyman Hall's St. John's Parish that we learned about last week, in a predominantly loyalist and non-committal colony. So, I mean, pretty interesting stuff. It's interesting how, and I've told you guys this, there's so many different accounts. It's amazing. Like, I'm going to be reading a lot of different accounts here for you guys. And you just don't know. I mean, there's so many conflicting stories. There's so many conflicting things that were said about these guys that, especially their early on life, because you got to remember, these guys, these declaration signers were born in the 1740s, maybe even early 1750s. Just not a lot of record keeping. And think about it. Think about the presidents who were born back in those times. You know, no one thought when even the presidents were born in those 1730s, 1740s, you know, that sort of thing, 1750s. No one ever thought that, hey, this guy might become president someday, so we better preserve where he was born and where he lived as a child growing up. You know, it wasn't until much later that, of course, those things really came to fruition. And it's really even more so with these Declaration of Independence signers, because they're really obscure, most of them. And who would have ever thought, or who would have thunk it, right, as they say, to think, hey, this person might grow up to sign a document that declares independence for a brand new country. Nobody ever thought of that. So the conflicting stories are not really surprising when you really stop and think about it. George Walton, of course, we said, native of Virginia, self-made man, orphan, apprenticeship. His unpromising beginnings make us think of signers like Roger Sherman and Samuel Huntington, also largely self-taught or apprenticed as a shoemaker and a cooper, respectively, before the study of law opened up new possibilities for them. Walton utilized this same gateway to success after moving to Savannah in 1769. He was admitted to the legal profession, and at the same time taking up the cause of the American independence, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's kind of the same type of information. George Walton, I said, he was the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. Now, this source says that he was born near Farmville, Virginia, in late 1749 or early 1750. His parents passed away when he was a young child, and an uncle reared him. He largely was self-educated and learned the trade of carpentry. In 1769, Walton moved to Savannah, studied law, and was admitted to the bar in 1774. Now, Farmville, Virginia, let's take a look here. So taking a look, Farmville, Virginia, it's a little bit southwest of Richmond, Virginia, and it's a little bit southeast of Lynchburg, Virginia, kind of right in the middle of both of them. If anybody is familiar with Appomattox, Virginia, of course, famous for Appomattox Courthouse, where the Civil War came to an end, it's almost directly east of Appomattox, and I would say it's probably, if I had to guess, maybe approximately, I don't know, maybe 20, 5 miles east. Yeah, I'd say in between 25 to 30 miles east of Appomattox, Virginia, is where Farmville, Virginia is, to give you an idea. I looked it up. There's absolutely zero record of any sort of like historical marker in Farmville, Virginia, or anywhere near there to state that, oh, this is where George Walton was born. There's nothing. So again, is it accurate? Was it Farmville? Not sure, but that is what one source tells me. So interesting stuff. And again, like I said, while we are definitely sure that George Walton was the youngest signer, his exact birth date is really not known. Believed that it was in Virginia, 1749, 1750. Who knows? It really is hard to tell. Right before in the early stages of the Revolutionary War, when all that was brewing, George Walton actually became one of the top lawyers in all of Georgia. And then, of course, he soon became deeply involved after that in the Patriot movement in Georgia. But interesting stuff. Now, this last source that I'm going to read to you guys, I'm going to read this verbatim. This is actually a really good source. Well, actually, I should take that back. It's not the last source. I'm going to save that for last. So this is another source that's kind of in a biography of all these signers. George Walton, the last of the Georgia delegation who signed the Declaration of Independence, and with an account of whom we shall conclude these biographical notices, was born in the county of Frederick, Virginia, about the year 1740. So that's way off to what we said. Now, here's what's even more interesting. So this source that I'm reading from now, that I just read that, about 1740, it said was born in the county of Frederick, Virginia. Now, Farmville, Virginia, is actually the county seat of Prince Edward County. So, who knows what is the real... And Frederick, Virginia, that is Frederick County, that is obviously a county in Virginia, but Frederick County is more north of where we were, as far as like Farmville goes. Just to give you an idea, Frederick County, Virginia is kind of like in northern Virginia, and if you're looking at it from a perspective of how far away Frederick County is from Farmville, I just looked it up. It's 170 miles north, like almost a direct shot north. Like from where Farmville, Virginia is, like we said, if you go all the way straight up north for 170 miles, you hit Frederick County, Virginia, which is it's actually almost into West Virginia. You're like right on the border of West Virginia, believe it or not. So, who knows? And then there was the other source that I had read to you guys that I believe it said Burke County, Virginia, was the first thing that I said to you. No, I'm sorry. Cumberland County, Virginia was the one that I had read. Now, Cumberland County, Virginia, let's get some perspective there. See, this is why I love this. I know this sounds a little tedious what I'm doing, but this is how so different all of these different perspectives and accounts are. Now, Cumberland County, Virginia, that is only 19 to 20 miles north of Farmville. And actually, when you look up Farmville, Virginia, it says counties that it's in, Prince Edward / Cumberland. So Farmville is actually considered part of Cumberland County, or at least some part of it. So that makes a little bit more sense. Now, that was one of the first things that I had read. Again, who knows? I'm going to go with, there's a couple of sources that are saying that, Cumberland County, Farmville. I'm going to go with it's more like that, because this one, and again, this source that I'm reading now was also a source that was written back in the 1800s, I believe. So old account, but it says Frederick County, Virginia, so who knows. In 1740, George Walton was early apprenticed to a carpenter who, being a man of selfish and contracted views, not only kept him closely at labor during the day, but refused him the privilege of a candle by which to read at night. Young George Walton possessed a mind by nature strong in its powers, and though uncultivated, not having enjoyed even the advantages of a good scholastic education, he was ardently bent on the acquisition of knowledge. Ardently, I should say. So bent that during the day, at his leisure moments, he would collect lightwood, which served him at night instead of a candle. His application was close, his acquisitions rapid and valuable. At the expiration of his apprenticeship, he removed to the province of Georgia and entered the office of a Mr. Young, with whom he pursued the preparatory studies of the profession of law, and in 1774 he entered upon its duties. At this time, the British government was in the exercise of full power in Georgia. Both the governor and his council were firm supporters of the British ministry. It was at this period that George Walton and other kindred spirits assembled a meeting of the Friends of Liberty. And we'll get into that more tomorrow in part 2, but man, I'll tell you, it's so crazy, the different accounts. And now this last account that I'm going to read, I think is one of the best because it really did a lot of research, this account. And it really goes kind of deep into his family history too. So let's read that and get into that. George Walton, alphabetically the last of the Georgia delegation to sign the Declaration of Independence, was born in the county of Prince Edward near Farmville, Virginia. The exact year of his birth is unknown. Some research has placed it as early as 1740, others as late as 1749 and 1750. There was a biographer that uses this date of 1741. His parents were Robert and Mary Hughes Walton. His Walton grandfather, George, had emigrated to Virginia from England in 1682. The parents were poor, and both had died by the time George was about 12. He was early apprenticed to a carpenter who, being a man of limited education and of selfish and contracted views, not only kept him closely at labor during the day, but refused him the privilege of a candle by which to read at night. We just read those exact words in another source. Now, hold on, let me get my bearings here to where I'm at. So now, to try not to repeat things, by 1769, though, George Walton was ready for a change in his life. Georgia was the newest and the last of the British colonies. Settlement had begun in 1733 with the arrival of James Oglethorpe from England, who brought his first group, 114, to start a new and different type of colony under charter from King George II. The original idea was to give the worthy poor in English debtor prisons a chance to be converted into farmers, merchants, and artisans, but economic considerations voided this idea, and only free men with the skills necessary for the colony's success were chosen, which is not the popular myth of the settlement. To discourage the English class society, strict rules required every man to work his own land. No slavery, no large grants of land, and no rum. They picked the high bluffs upstream on the river, and he laid out his unique design of streets, blocks, and public squares for Savannah, which are largely intact today in the historic Old Town of the city. Oglethorpe made friends with the Indian chief, and the new colony did well. Most of these social ideals and rules changed when Oglethorpe left for England 10 years later. Large-scale settlement did not come about until after the end of the French and Indian Wars in 1763, which treaty got the Spanish out of Florida and now became English territory. With no worries then about the safety of its southern border, the expanded opportunities for development in Georgia brought the new settlers. So we got that now. No doubt that the studious George Walton observed this potential, and after the expiration of his apprenticeship, he moved to the province of Georgia in 1769 and entered the office of Henry Young, a barrister in Savannah, with whom he pursued the preparatory studies of the profession of law, and in 1774, at the age of 33, he was admitted to the bar and began the practice of law. During these years, the British government had been in the exercise of full power in Georgia. Both the governor and his council were firm supporters of the British ministry. We had read this before. So at the time, the colony of Georgia was big supporters of the British ministry. A lot of loyalists. So I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a preface to end this here about what we will be discussing in part 2. So a little bit of a sneak peek, because it was at this period that George Walton, and as we said, other kindred spirits assembled a meeting of the Friends of Liberty at the Liberty Pole at Tondy's Tavern in Savannah to take into consideration the means of preserving the constitutional rights and liberties of the people of Georgia, which were endangered by the then recent acts of the British Parliament. Others also entered with great warmth and animation into the debate. It was at length determined to invite the different parishes of the province to come into a general union and cooperation with the other provinces of America to secure their constitutional rights and liberties. Thus began the Georgia Provincial Congress, and at this meeting, George Walton took a distinguished part and was named Secretary of the Congress and President of the newly formed Council of Safety. But Georgia was either very apathetic about liberty or timid, for the people at first did not go so far to approve the call to send delegates to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It was actually the only colony not to be represented. Soon after commencing the practice of his profession, George Walton became acquainted with some of the leading patriots in that province, among whom was Dr. Lyman Hall, who lived in the nearby parish of St. John. His law tutor was an ardent patriot also, and these influences, combined with his own natural bias, made him espouse the Republican cause with hearty zeal. He labored to have the whole province take the road toward freedom, which the parish of St. John had chosen, but it was slow going. So I know this is going to seem crazy, guys, and I know it's going to be like, wow, what is TJ doing? He's usually long-winded and rambles on, but this is going to conclude. There's no probably about it. This is going to conclude part 1, because really it covers his early life, which there's so many different accounts of, as we heard. And then, he moved down to Georgia, practiced law, and now it's leading right up to that Revolutionary War and American Revolution time frame and time period. And that's what we're going to cover in part 2, of course. The American Revolution. George Walton's time actually doing service in battle, where he was wounded, where he was captured. We're going to hear all about that tomorrow. It's fascinating. And then, of course, we're going to hear all about the signing of the Declaration, leading up to that, and then the time after that, his later life. What did George Walton do after, he was a part of the Second Continental Congress and signing the Declaration of Independence? We're going to hear all about that tomorrow. So, no bonus footage for part 1. Part 2, there will be bonus footage, of course, of George Walton's gravesite and some other things. But in this part 1, there is no bonus footage for this. Because, again, even down in Virginia, there's nothing that claims to be the birthplace. Not a historical marker, not, a remade house, kind of a fabrication type thing of his birthplace home. There's nothing. Maybe I'm wrong, but from the research I've done, I cannot find anything regarding George Walton and his birthplace in Virginia. Not a historical roadside marker, nothing. So if somebody can tell me different, please, by all means, tell me, because I have looked and I have not found anything. So there you have it, guys. The youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence, Mr. George Walton, the last signer from the state of Georgia. I hope you guys enjoyed this part 1. Hope it was informative. And stay tuned for tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day, part 2 and the conclusion of our Georgia signers with George Walton. Thank you so much, guys, for all the likes, the subscribes, the comments, the questions, everything, all the support. Henry and I cannot thank you guys enough. We love it. Love you guys. We really appreciate it. You guys are the best. And we look forward to bringing you the conclusion tomorrow on Thanksgiving Day. So stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye now.